A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments." The Gospel of the Lord. Good morning. It is good for us to be here. In the Gospel today, Jesus teaches that the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Think, who is my neighbor? In Exodus 22, which gives us the first reading we heard at Mass this morning, God spoke with Moses on the mountain and gave him the laws for the people of Israel. "You shall not molest or oppose an alien, for you were once aliens yourselves in the land of Egypt." We are called to reflect. We were once aliens ourselves. Who is our neighbor? With this in mind, for this reason, I invite you to reflect on the topic of immigration. This issue is a really big one. Lots of controversy surrounds it. Many people have different opinions. I ask, please don't pick up the pews and throw them at me. We are not here now to solve the problem of immigration. We are not here to make recommendations. We are not here to propose policies. We are not here to discuss politics. The issues of immigration can seem overwhelming. So much of this issue is out of our hands and completely out of our control. There seems to be no solution. But we have our faith to guide us in the controversy that surrounds it, with the certainty that God sees what is going on, and we should keep in mind that God is in control. What can we do? We are here now, and we can see the issue of immigration that our nation faces as a humanitarian crisis. Humanitarian is the key. We need to be mindful of the fact that the migrants are here and that they are people and should be regarded with dignity and respect because they are people. Remember that we were once immigrants and aliens ourselves. Perhaps a good starting point is to reflect on our own family's immigrant experiences, stories. Take time to have a discussion with our children about our families, where we came from, our own history, our experiences, our struggles as immigrants. I remember my grandmother telling a story when she came here from Denmark in the 1920s. She couldn't speak a word of English. They didn't understand anything about the money. So she said one time they would just go into the store with the money in their hand and depend on the clerk to take out what they needed and put the change in. And she said one time she went into a bakery and needed a loaf of bread, and the guy at the bakery took out enough money that she made in 2 days for her to pay for that loaf of bread. How they were cheated. We are all entitled to have our own opinions about the migrants, but they are here, and if you look carefully, their presence is very obvious, especially when you walk the aisles at Walmart. Whenever I go there, I always see them, and I offer to help them translate. Excuse me. And the last time I was there, I met a Venezuelan family. In Venezuela, the average wage is $24 a month. The economy in that country is a shambles, a disaster under Nicolas Maduro. So this gentleman I was talking to had a job. He was offered no papers, illegal, cash under the table, but the owner of a building downtown hired him and several other men to hang drywall. You know how hard that job is. He offered to pay the men $10 an hour for 10 hours a day for 3 days. So he expected to make $300 from that job. Well, you might think, well, that's nothing. But to someone who was making $24 a month, this is a fortune. Well, anyway, at the end of the job, the guy refused to pay all the workers. He says, you all go. I don't have the money to pay you. And I think of myself, and it was not all that long ago, how loss of 3 days' wages would have been a disaster to my family. Of course, we have stories like this, and then we have horror stories regarding the migrants. There are bad people among them, and this fact we cannot deny. But the issue of immigration, we have to think about the reality of the situation in Mexico. Most people would agree that those with legal status and education can make a living in Mexico. You won't make much, but you'll survive. But we need to remember that the immigrants from Venezuela, Colombia, and Central America are undocumented in Mexico too. They have no legal status there. People say that nothing is free in Mexico. In that situation, if you don't work, you steal, or find yourself in some illegal activity in order to make money to survive. The legalization of marijuana in the United States has in many ways made the situation go from bad to worse on both sides of the border, because the decreased demand for marijuana here in the United States has led the drug cartels in Mexico to change production to making opioids and fentanyl, and recruiting the desperate migrants from Colombia, Venezuela, and Central America to work like slaves for them in its production. Also, what I feel is sadly overlooked is this, in the situation of the migrants, is the generosity of the Mexican people. Many migrants make their way northward through Mexico and get humble meals and shelter from the Mexican people, who have little themselves but share what they have with migrant families. There are stories in the Mexican news that show migrants traveling north through Mexico in open freight cars, and when the trains make stops along the way, the people throw food to them. Connected with the issue of immigration to think about is the reality of the situation of deportation. Often, the migrants make the journey north as whole families: fathers, mothers, kids, aunts, uncles, grandparents sell all they have and make the journey together. If they get sent back to where they came from, quite often there is nobody there to support them and nothing absolutely for them there. The problems that led them to leave in the first place are there and may have even gotten worse. A desperate, dire situation. What can we do? This is a humanitarian issue that involves people. There are no quick, easy answers. We can pray. Prayer won't change the world, but prayer can change people, and people can change the world. We can treat the migrants we meet with respect. It can be quite simple as offering to translate for them if we are able to. Listen to their stories and hear what they say. We can donate. I realize that many people now are very much tapped out, but Deacon Carlos and I are sponsoring a toiletry drive. There are boxes in the back of church where we're collecting toiletries and personal care items, and the boxes will be in church all week up until next weekend. So if you come to Mass for All Saints Day, All Souls Day, and the Mass is next weekend on the 5th and 6th, you can bring some article of toiletry with you, perhaps toothpaste or mouthwash or something that a migrant might need to have. And we're going to take these things and bring them to the Instituto del Progreso Latino, and they're going to distribute them to the migrant shelter sites. Why do anything like this or talk about this in church? Isn't it the government's responsibility? But the pastoral constitution on church in the modern world from Vatican II states, faith should show its fruitfulness by penetrating the entire life, even the worldly activities of those who believe, and by urging them to be loving and just, especially toward those in need. Why do this in church? We remember that we are a pilgrim people. We are on a journey. We are all migrants on our journey to salvation as Christians. The little sacrifices we make in life, even something as simple as donating a small tube of toothpaste to help a migrant, is our participation in the death and resurrection of Jesus on the cross. Our baptism gives us the joy to do this. Our sacrifices make us better people, living lives of grace. The Eucharist we receive is not like a cake we put in the oven. We take it out and it's done. Like the Eucharist, we are never finished. Grace doesn't come to us all at once. The grace God gives us leads us to yet another step and another opportunity to get God's grace. That's what Christian social teaching is all about. That's why we reflect on issues such as immigration in the church. Jesus is alive now and is calling us to the next step on our journey to be with him and to bring about the redemption of the world. Jesus is not just a character from the past. Jesus is not just a historical activity, historical personality. Jesus is a real person, and he is with us to know him and to fall in love with him. Jesus is here calling us to join him and learn about issues such as immigration, and he makes a claim on us to do whatever we can to bring about the salvation of the world. May God continue to bless us.
Please stand and let